when we were back in the green room, we were talking a little bit about how things have changed for science fiction and fantasy, how in earlier decades it was more of or considered a kind of paraliterary genre, couldn't get any respect. Now suddenly science fiction and fantasy are at the center of the culture. So what do you guys think caused that to happen, and what kind of effects has it had? Do you have anything you'd like to say about that change?
Well, I'm not really sure what caused it to happen, but it certainly has been happening during my lifetime. I mean, certainly when I was young, if they caught you in school reading a science fiction book, they'd take it away from you. Why are you wasting your mind with that crap? Why don't you read Silas Marner? There were no, when I was going to college, there were no college courses in science fiction or fantasy. And depending on what professor you got, if you took a creative writing course, some of them would let you write it, but a lot of them would not. You know, this is creative writing, we're doing literature here, we don't want that genre crap. So you got that, but I have seen those attitudes change. I think even as early as the late 70s, you started seeing courses in science fiction, and mostly in science fiction, not so much in fantasy, popping up at a few universities. I think Bowling Green in Ohio was one of the first, and we've heard about the people there doing that. Well, my voice has suddenly gotten much louder and echoier. Yes, I am the voice of God. And today, it's a very different landscape. We have science fiction fantasy writers winning the Pulitzer Prize, winning other, major prizes, winning National Book Awards. Stephen King winning a National Book Award. Even that was controversial, though. There were some writers who did not like that and protested against that bitterly. So things have changed a great deal, and from where I stand, have changed for the better. But the change is still not complete. Even now, you may have a course in science fiction, a course in fantasy taught at your university, but if the course is, Survey of American Literature, there will be no science fiction books in the canon there. There will be no Gene Wolfe or Ursula K. Le Guin or Roger Zelazny or some of the great things. Well, they will not be included with Hemingway and Fitzgerald and Philip Roth and Saul Bellow and the other people. So it's changed for the better, but the change is not yet complete.
So the literary canon, you think, still excludes science fiction and fantasy writers, even though you may have courses in universities that focus on it?
Yes, the official literary canon, such as it is, which is kept alive mainly by academia, I think, still excludes not only science fiction, fantasy, but pretty much all genre fiction. That's also true. You can take a course in mystery fiction and some things, and then you'll get Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and some of the others, but you will not get a Raymond Chandler novel taught at the same time as The Great Gatsby in the same course.
Stan, do you have feelings about this change?
Well, it was an English department thing to a certain extent, as well as what we would call the New York literary establishment. But when you were in the modernist period, one of the things that meant was that there was high literature and pop literature, and high literature was high and pop literature was low. And so it was a kind of a class system, but in any case, a snobbery. And people like to be snobs in a way because it clarifies what's good and what isn't. So, but the thing is that fantasy, Gilgamesh, the first story that we have, that's a fantasy, a really good one. And science fiction, we are now all living in a science fiction novel that we're co-authoring together. So when, on the one hand, you got realism, well, that would be science fiction. On the other hand, you have fantasy, well, that's our dream life, that's the stories that we tell each other every day. There was always a good reason for science fiction and fantasy to be central, but there was a short period of time where you had to be doing what I call domestic realism to be legitimate in the modernist system. But I will say the literature department here at UCSD, all the way back to 1970, which is when I first encountered it, was always extremely welcoming to science fiction crazies like myself, mainly because of the professors that I met, and so it was a matter of accident. And that's a good thing about UCSD, and maybe why UCSD has had so many great science fiction writers come out of it. Not out of the literature department, but at least out of UCSD.
It should be, the division between high literature and low literature, pop literature culture is actually a relatively recent thing in global history.
That's right.
If you go back to, the Elizabethan theater, Shakespeare was not some hoity-toity guy. He was writing for the groundling as much as anything else. He was including plenty of ribald jokes and sword fights and, exciting stuff in his plays that would please the people who were just standing in the pit and eating an onion. Because if you didn't, they might throw that onion. And they were very conscious of audience reaction. I think a lot of the division that produced this attitude dates from Henry James and Robert Louis Stevenson. Do most of you know that story from your lit courses? I don't want to bore you if you already do, but...
I don't think they know it.
Tell it again.
They don't know it, okay. Henry James and Robert Louis Stevenson had a celebrated literary quarrel at one point, which was brought on by James writing a review of 2 books, one of which was Treasure Island by Stevenson, and the other which was a book about a young boy. I don't remember the author. It was a book about a young boy in provincial France coming of age, growing up. And James, in this review, contrasted the 2 books. And he said, "For me, the pleasure of literature is seeing the author's depiction of the world and the recognition it brings in me." And I go through it and I say, yes, he got that right. No, I don't think he's describing that right. The quality that he brings to common shared experiences of people in the real world experiencing real things. And in the case of these 2 books, he said, well, the Treasure Island is far more accomplished, the prose is better, it's altogether better written, but it's very unrealistic. And he said the French book, despite all of its flaws, is about a child growing up, and that's an experience I have had. I have been a small child trying to come to terms with adulthood, so I have been a child. But I have never been a pirate hunting for buried gold and having sword fights and dealing with the black spot and yada, yada, yada. And so, therefore, even though Treasure Island is a more accomplished book, the French book is a more worthy book. It's a more serious book about a serious subject. And the other one is just sort of fun. Stevenson responded in the next issue of the magazine with a rather famous one-sentence thing here. Mr. James says that he has been a child, but he has never been a pirate hunting for buried gold. Then obviously he has never been a child. And James responded to that, and many other people got involved, and it became a very long literary debate, which the academic and literary establishment of the time subsequently decided that James had won. And from that point on, Stevenson and all of the Treasure Islands and kidnaps and Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and all this stuff were sort of consigned to genre literature, kiddie literature, fun for children, but not about serious subjects in the real world. If you want to be a serious writer, you have to write about, coming of age and problems in modern life and, things like that, hopefully as elegantly as possible. And therefore, we had the whole creation of genre literatures, which was accelerated by the growth of the pulp magazines in America, which were all genre magazines. Detective fiction and romance fiction and ranch romances and westerns and Zeppelin stories. They were all very specialized, but they were all pulp, and they weren't serious literature. All science fiction and fantasy writers, all mystery writers, all romance writers were all the literary descendants of Robert Louis Stevenson, while the people who are writing literary fiction are the literary descendants of Henry James. But I think, and I hope, that the 2 sides, having been separated for a century, are starting to come together again. When they give Stephen King the National Book Award, he's definitely a descendant of Stevenson. And that gives me great hope for the future.